Hello friend, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, this will be a pretty fun and interesting tutorial of a Bob Ross painting I did completely on Procreate. I really wanted to show with this painting what was, I think people get intimidated by digital painting, and in truth, it is so much fun, and honestly, the techniques are so similar to traditional mediums like oil paint and acrylic that I really wanted to show what was possible. Now, in this tutorial, I will try to get every single thing that I did, but I know I'm going to miss something. Note that I will try to remember the brush that I used, and every time, well, almost every time that I add a new color, I add a new layer. That way I don't touch what's below it. But when I start to blend, I definitely combine layers. But I hope you enjoy. Here we go. So I started several different ways of trying to create the sky. I tried a couple different ways to do the sky, but I found ultimately the easiest was to just go in directly with that sky blue and start adding in the white to create some depth. I used the damp brush tool and the airbrush tool to kind of blend them both together. And then at the bottom, I repeated for the water reflections later on. And here I started adding in the first layer of clouds, which is on a new layer. And then I started in with the mountains. Now the mountains, I used the airbrush tool, the soft airbrush tool, and then slowly took the damp brush tool and started blending and blurring the edges out. And I found too, there was really no avoidable way to keep the top of the mountain clean. So I just used the eraser and cleaned up the lines. I wanted to add as well that in the initial tutorial, I wanted to stay as true to the Bob Ross tutorial to see if I could actually do it rather than using my own technique and method of doing it. So here I'm adding in the first layer of snow, and we always start with the brightest side and the whitest side, and then going in with a slightly darker shade of the same gray and creating the shadow on the other side. So here I'm combining layers and then blurring that in to kind of create a misty area in the front. I'm also following his technique. He added this white little peak that you'll see at the very end of the painting. I add more to. So here in a new layer, we start essentially what is the middle of the painting, and these will be the very backmost trees. And I had a little bit of an issue trying to figure out the best way to create those blurry, slightly indistinct trees in his style anyways. And I wanted it to be sure to remain as true to what he was doing on his canvas as I could. So here with that same shade of gray, only a little bit darker, I'm going in with the damp brush tool and adding more trees in the front. Also with this kind of area, it's kind of fun too to drag it into new areas to really create new layers of depth. And also keeping these tree layers in their own separate layer. You're not going to pick up the blue and that weird gray together, and while you want to do that later on for the mist, you'll end up with blue trees, so don't combine them yet. So here I'm going back through, and I think I took the airbrush tool and I lightened that area up a little bit. But now I'm going in with the very it's kind of difficult because these trees I think were the most difficult out of the entire painting, and it was because they have to be thicker at the edges and then thinner at the middle, but because when you press down on Procreate, it doesn't give you multiple sizes. You have to go in and manually change the size before you can even do any blending. So I tried a couple different ways of doing it, and I think ultimately the final look I was pretty happy with. I wanted to add too that I played with the opacity of some of the layers just to get the final effect. But what I decided to do, it's done in 3 different stages. I took the airbrush tool and created different like ridges into the center, getting smaller in the center. And then I took the oil paint tool and chipped into it from the top, creating the different sizes of the trees. I know it's a really convoluted method of getting there, but ultimately I think you'll really like the effect it gives. And then I took the damp brush tool, I think it was at like 30% or 20% opacity. You'll just have to play with it. And then blurred upwards to match the paint strokes of the rest of the painting. I tend to use the damp brush tool, the oil brush tool, and the light brush pen most often in most of my paintings. So this layer was done, it was a little bit of a bugger too. I ended up having to do it the exact same way I just did the trees before, and then I played with the opacity a little bit. So here I'm going in and chipping away, and after I get that done, I blur those edge lines up. I also wanted to say I used the soft airbrush tool and erased some of the bottom to give it a slightly harder edge. So you kind of see me here mess up a little bit with the reflections in the water, and it's because I felt like the painting was kind of a little crooked, so I decided to fix that before I continued. Here I'm going in and just adding a little bit more reflection and carrying that area down a little bit. And now here I went in with the damp brush tool and making sure, like Bob says, to keep all the lines straight in the water. But after that, I added a new layer and started on the tree. And for the tree, I used the oil paint tool and just blocked in a black pine tree shape like he did instead of using the fan brush. And then I took the damp brush tool at like 25% or so opacity and blurred out the edges a little bit. That way it's not as harsh. And basically just repeated the same thing on this tree and the next tree you're about to see. And then here I just added and made that area a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. Always making sure to go back through with the damp brush tool at very low opacity to make sure all of the brush strokes look like they belong in the painting with the background. It took a really long time to learn how to paint pine trees for some reason. That is a really hard tree to paint. I don't know how many of you else guys, I can't English, but how many of you guys have had problems painting pine trees before? So here, this is kind of where the painting starts to divulge a little bit or divert itself away from the original technique. And it's because I realized as I was adding the layering, it couldn't be done exactly like Bob did it. But here I wanted to add too that I made the tree trunks with the light pen tool, and I turn the opacity down, that way you can get a better line. But it's the reason I do that too is it's a little bit more controllable. But then after that line is in there, I just blurred those edges out. So you'll see me too quickly add some little stroke lines, and I did that by choosing a gray tone with the damp brush at like 2% size and 50 or 60% opacity, and then just gouging little lines into the painting. That way it kind of looked like the palette knife strokes. But here, I started putting the first layer of green on the trees, and that was done exactly the same way as I did the black. I took the oil paint tool with varying sizes, and then just took the damp brush tool and kind of blurred it out a little bit. So similar to actual oil paint, it blends, but there's 2 steps to make the same technique, if that makes sense. So here's where my painting, I would say is the most different from Bob's actual painting. And I tried to go in and kind of brush on with a larger brush with the damp brush tool, and it was just making this really strange texture, and I didn't like it. So I decided to try jittering between colors, and that worked a little bit, but it still wasn't giving me the right tone. I feel like it was too saturated for the painting. Something I really pay attention to in my own paintings is really focusing where the point of light in the painting is coming from. Sometimes I see a lot of landscapes go wrong when there's no real lighting source and everything's kind of lit the same. It just looks artificial. But here I decided to go in with a second layer of smaller strokes, more similar to how I actually do my own paintings. I kind of gave up on the stamping method. It just didn't work with this medium. But you'll see me kind of go back here and create the base layer. And this base layer really just creates a bunch of tones that you can go back and blur together. I must not have liked that the first time because I got rid of it. So here's the second time. But I also decided that little corner where the red tree is in the middle needed to go. So I decided to change that. But here I'm going through and blurring the edges. There we go. There it is. And I'm going through and adding the depth because sometimes with digital painting, well, and with regular painting, sometimes the depth is really easy to lose in landscapes. But thankfully, it's really easy with this because you can just go back and delete the layer and try again. But here I'm going through and adding that second layer of details. I really kind of want to do a painting tutorial just for trees and how I paint trees. Because I think it would be really helpful for people wanting to learn how to do landscapes on the iPad. But I'm going through and I added another layer of green, so on the other side it all matches. And then I changed the saturation and added some more depth into the corner. You'll find that most trees in nature, especially when they're painted, regardless of what medium they're in, are just variations of different size shapes overlapping each other, all kind of blended out. Then I went through and I added a little bit of warmth because I know in the original painting he had some red and orange trees, so I really wanted to keep the spirit of that. And then I went in and started adding details to the bottom trees and started blending them out a little bit. And usually I use, when I apply them, I use the damp brush tool, and then I go in and blur them out. And then I added more strokes over top to really give some depth to it. And then I hopped over to the other side and added a little bit more to those trees. And here I'm just going through and adding more detail, blending. Every step is blended. Make sure we blend. Did I mention blending? But here we go in and I added a little bit more depth because it kind of just looks like one big weird green blob over here. So we're going through and adding some shape. And that was a really big challenge to make it still look like it was in Bob's style. But I'm finishing up the green, and now I added a rock. And the rocks are kind of made similar to how the mountains are, where the bright side is that gray color, the base is a red, and then the back side has like a bluish gray shadow. But here I started with one layer of dark brown, and then I went over top of it with a slightly lighter shade similar to the mountain shade, and then I just doubled it and blended it out. And here I'm adding some trees, kind of adding the final touches to the actual video tutorial. I go in here in a minute and start adding my own details. But sometimes I find I have to force myself to stop, or I just keep painting. And things become overdone very quickly. So that is a huge lesson to learn as an artist, is when to stop. Which is why I like doing short little paintings that I only give myself one day to do. But here I went in and added more stick lines like earlier in the painting. And then I did this a couple of different ways, adding the light reflections over the top. It really helps to add some depth there in the front. But that was the end of Bob's tutorial, but I went in and added some more details to kind of make it my own. I added some more clouds, and then I ended up signing it with his traditional red signature, which actually I kind of like, and I may use in other paintings. It's kind of fun. But here I'm going in and adding more light detail to the tree because that was driving me crazy. And then I'm just going in and blurring that, and I changed the opacity and lowered it. Then in a bottom layer, I added a little bit more depth to the actual lake, and I added some more depth to the trees. Something kind of fun I did, I took the airbrush tool and added some fog over the trees to really make them look like they were seeding. And then I wanted to change the mountain a little bit too. I felt like it was too blocky, so I added a little bit more snow, and I increased the shading on the edges, really getting rid of those hard black lines on the outside. Then capping the peak a little bit better. Trying to think if there was anything else important that I added. I went through too down at the bottom and I made the mist a little bit more prominent. I added a little bit more to the clouds. Something else I like to do too around the edges. I like to take the airbrush tool and with very low opacity go around the edges to make it look like the center is coming in. And then I tried to add some light, but I didn't end up liking it, so I ended up taking it out. But I added a couple more leaf details in the front, and that pretty much ends our tutorial. But I really hope you enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun for me, so I definitely think I'm going to do more. And I hope that no matter what skill level you're at, from beginning to intermediate to advanced, I hope you were able to take something away from this tutorial. I've learned so much from watching YouTube over these past few years as an artist and watching Bob Ross when I was younger. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to make my very first real in-depth tutorial one of his paintings. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any other ideas of painting tutorials, I would love to hear it down in the comments, or if you want me to do another Bob Ross painting. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. If you like this video, just give me a comment, like, and subscribe. See you next time.